Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. It's early. I'm tired, but I have a radio show this evening. It's going to be on a show called By Any Means Necessary. It's on Sputnik. It's coming up. I'm going to be on it, I think, between 3 to 4. So I'm going to be driving to DC. So I'm trying to get my shows out the way early this morning. Let me check my audio. I have no expectation of anybody being here this early. So I am just going to run through this show. And let me flip this because my super chat seems to be broken. Not super chat, but my chat. There we are. Good. So, Jewish state! Exclamation point. Legislation is passed in Israel in the dark of the morning that makes Israel officially a Jewish state. I hope they put it in an exclamation point in the document because, after all, they are trying to get something across to the people who are living there that aren't Jews. Because, after all, there are people that are living there that aren't Jews. And just by definition, by logical extraction, if there are people who are living in a particular state in which the state has enshrined into law that it is a Jewish state, wouldn't those people by definition be second-class citizens? That's assuming if they're citizens at all. I'm going to play Real News Network. They do a really good breakdown of this. There's an interesting distinction in the way the media has been reporting this versus the way the correct translation that the gentleman is going to get into. And part of that direct translation goes into this idea of the difference between being a nation state versus the difference between, I guess, just being a nation. Or being a state. The breakdown or the basic difference that the gentleman is going to make clear, and I find this fascinating. Granted, this is language, and languages can be cut in all sorts of ways, but I'm sorry, I'm stopped up and it's early. And I put these eye drops in, and these eye drops are making everything look weird. But the distinction here, or the difference here, has to do with there are people living on our soil that do not have access to equal rights. So if France calls itself a nation, all of the people who are living in France, or all of the people who are under the nation of France, are citizens. They have equal rights. One man, one vote. Congratulations. You're here. You're counted. But we all know that that's not true in Israel. We all know that it's not one man, one vote. And I suspect this is done for two political reasons. Just for distinction for that standpoint. Israel is not that way. Everyone who's under that particular nation does not have equal rights. So no, it's not this kind of a nation per se where all of these other, like if it was in Europe or somewhere else. It's a state. And if we're being honest, at this point, they've essentially formalized this idea of themselves being an apartheid state. A distinction between us versus others who are also within the confines of what we would consider to be Israel. Two things, but I want to add something else. The UN was issuing a report essentially saying that Israel was creating an edifice to create an apartheid state, formalize this idea of an apartheid state. 2 points. This is colonialism. Now, people don't like to call it that in the same way people don't like to call Puerto Rico a colony. Or, a colony. This is an apartheid state. I mean, I'm sorry, this is a colony. For all intents and purposes, you have settlers from Europe who went into a particular place and took that place. Eventually get to the point of, you can say, conquering and militarily occupying the spot. If we were looking at, let's say, Africa, let's say the colonies that Europe did wasn't necessarily back in the 1800s. Let's say it was today. Let's say Britain, for whatever reason, for shits and giggles, decided to go into Namibia and set up fort. What would it look like? Like if it took place today, what would it look like today? What would Britain say in order to explain itself? What would Britain do in order to secure its borders? What will Britain pass from the standpoint of laws in order to make itself, the white citizens of that spot, distinct from the people who are around it? and to justify the acquisition of land and resources and everything else, what would they do? What would they say? Now, assume for the moment that that colony would get support from Britain itself. I'm trying to make this point clear to you in your head that in the same way we look back at colonies that took place like in the 1800s and everything else, we look at that stuff as ancient history. That stuff is just stuff that took place before, but Israel is somehow different. How? How is it different? It's the same thing. The only difference of it is you have modern cameras. You have people who can look at it and tweet about it around the world. You have Google where you can look it up. You can look at the law. You can look at people burning the document in Parliament. You couldn't do that necessarily in the 1800s. You can do it now. And so the media and the apparatus itself, power in this case, has to explain itself. And how would it explain itself? It was back then in the 1800s. This is a living, modern day colony with the legal edifices working around it, with a major power giving support to it, which gives it to some degree a certain amount of legitimacy. And secondary point, from the media standpoint, calling itself a Jewish nation, there's a political angle of this, but there are two political angles. One has to do with the tax. I'm writing this down because I know I'm going to forget it as I talk about it. One has to do with the tax. The other has to do with a single state solution. Sorry, this was in my head this morning at like 3 a.m. Couldn't get it out. So I said, fuck it, I'll do a video. So, if I attack Israel, I am attacking Israel. I'm attacking Israel not because it's Jewish. I'm attacking Israel because it's Israel. I would attack Israel in the same way I would attack some state in Africa that was killing people, or some United States for murdering somebody, or some kind of exploitive act that another particular country has taken. I'm attacking the country because of something the country is doing. I'm not attacking a country because it's Jewish. However, that will be the way it's codified. People who are attacking it will get the label of being anti-Semitic because you're attacking a Jewish state, because after all, it's a Jewish state. It's not anything, it's Israel. It's a state that is acting in a particular way. I'm saying this because that's what takes place now. Part of the attacks level that Jeremy Corbyn had done is shut Corbyn's attacks on Israel up, conflating this idea of an attack on Israel with an attack on Judaism. It is nonsense, but from a political space, that's the way to which this is used. Look at the attacks on Corbyn. You would never find anything that Corbyn has ever said that is anti-Semitic, and yet you have some raging lunatic howling at him that he's a fucking anti-Semite. This is the point that I'm getting at. Calling itself a Jewish state is not purely just for this rah-rah standpoint. Yes, there's a certain level of pride in Zionism associated with it. But part of this has to do with covering itself from murdering and attacks by being able to label somebody anti-Semitic. This is absurd, of course, but it is what's going to take place. It's like a country in Africa where you attack it and they say you're attacking us because we're black. It's nonsense. And yet, that is the way it's going to be coded. The second part to this is a single state solution. The image that you're seeing here, this one. Let's see if I can expand it. This is what Palestine was, and what it is now. Where's your single state? I mean, how can you have a dual state? What of this gives you the impression that a two-state solution is possible under the current way things are going? And what you, for all intents and purposes, have is a continued theft of land with a dog and pony show of we're negotiating, even though the people who you're negotiating with are essentially in the bag for one of the sides. Nuclear weapons, billions of dollars, and even when they're murdering the other side of the negotiating table, civilians en masse, the side that's supposed to be the arbiter and is supposed to be a fair arbiter, continues to give billions of dollars in weapons. Um, Calling itself a Jewish state to some degree tries to head off this idea of merging the two together, meaning a single state solution. The argument has been, if you have a single state, you are effectively destroying Israel. Are you trying to say that you don't believe Israel should exist? That's the argument. Now, if Israel is a Jewish state, and you say, well, look, a single state solution is the only solution that's going to work, or you're destroying a Jewish state, are you saying that you don't want the state of Israel to exist? Missing the fact, the irony of this, being that the very creation of the Israeli quote-unquote Jewish state has destroyed Palestine. Screaming at the top of your lungs that everyone wants to destroy Israel, you've destroyed another state. Let me show you the clip from Real News Network, because I think it's a real clip. I think it's a good clip, of course it's a real clip. And I think they give a good breakdown. Shwarmini Pires gets something wrong here in the beginning. That's kind of funny. But the guy corrects her. This wasn't done just willy-nilly. This bill had been debated going all the way back to, I think, like 2011 or something. And it's like bills in our Congress, where sometimes it gets pushed to the side, it gets bounced around, but ultimately, apparently there was enough political clout, political will, or something that was able to get this thing passed against, you could say, the Arab delegation that was in their congressional body. Now, Israel doesn't have a constitution in the way we would think of a constitution. They have, I guess they call it basic law, or basic rule. They're going to get into it and explain some of it. So let's take a look. I'm putting one of the other sources at the bottom of the Real News thing in case you just want a snapshot of what's taking place.
Start with what this bill is all about, why it's being introduced at this time, and where very little debate has taken place, but Netanyahu managed to push it through.
Well, actually, there was a lot of debate taking place. When the bill was first introduced in 2011, there was a lot of opposition because the bill is very anti-democratic and it changes the balance, the very delicate balance that the Israeli government has tried unsuccessfully to maintain since the founding of the state between a concept of having a Jewish state and having a democracy. In truth, Israel was never a democracy, but it could always pretend to be. And the problem with this bill is for the Israeli parliament and for the Israeli government is that the pretense is gone. Now it's very clear that Israel is a Jewish state first and a democracy later, if at all. And that's really what this bill is all about, because it doesn't really change much in terms of the legislation. It mainly focuses on symbolic issues and the fact, for example, of declaring Hebrew as the only language, or the only official language, is again all about the symbolism. It's not so much about how the government practices are about to change, but it's a clear statement to the citizens of Israel who are not Jewish: you are now second-class citizens. And it's a clear statement to the world: Israel is a Jewish state first, and it's only a democracy in as much as the supremacy of the Jews is not challenged.
Now, the United List proposed an alternative bill here, which would have ensured equal rights for all of the citizens of Israel. If this bill was so unpopular in the Knesset, why did the Presidium decide to ban it from a vote?
I think what the United List did with their bill, they also knew that this bill will not get a majority. If there was a majority in the Israeli Knesset to have a democracy, then Israel would have been a democracy by now. But they put this bill forward because they wanted to have that vote in the open. They wanted to have a list of all the members of the Israeli Knesset who raised their hand and voted against equal rights to all the citizens. And of course, Israeli members of Knesset don't want to raise their hand and admit that they are rejecting the idea of equal rights. But this is really an issue about how the debate inside Israel is so much different than the debate outside. Within Israel, the concept of a state of all its citizens, which is in the platform of the United List, a state of all its citizens, is taboo. It's considered a challenge to the very existence of the state as a Jewish state. And this is exactly what the Presidium said. They said, the United List is trying to end Israel as a Jewish state by promoting a state of all its citizens. When we talk about this, in any other country except Israel, the idea of a state of all its citizens sounds like a basic requisite for democracy. The citizens should own the state. And this is, I think, really the issue of this issue of translation is also how a lot of the international media is missing the point about the law of the nation state, because the name, the law of the nation state, is actually not the correct translation from Hebrew. The correct translation should be the law of the nation. The one thing that this law makes sure is that Israel is not a nation state. A nation state is a state like every state in Europe, for example, where there is a complete overlap between the citizens and the nation. Everyone who is part of the French nation is a citizen of France and vice versa. That's not the case in Israel. Israel is not the state of the Israeli nation because an Israeli nation doesn't exist. The Israeli Supreme Court in 2013 declared that it doesn't recognize an Israeli nation or nationality. It only recognizes Jewish nationality. And that means that citizens of Israel who don't happen to be Jews cannot be equal citizens. And therefore, it's not a nation state, and it should actually be called the law of the nation.
Shia, in the March of last year, the UN published a report which accused Israel of implementing an apartheid regime. In fact, this bill does exactly that. Now, following this report that the UN had done, the US had pressured that the report be censored by the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. And one of the most important issues in that report was this kind of separation between citizens and citizenship rights and the national rights one has as a citizen of a country. Now, this new law, as I said, does exactly that. Do you think that this means that the UN report was just ignored by the Israeli leadership and they must have known what's in it?
I actually think that the law was not passed back in 2011, but was passed now because of the UN report and because of increasing accusations of apartheid. Let's not forget that in South Africa during the days of apartheid, the government didn't try to argue that there is no apartheid in South Africa. They were very open about it. And this is what we see in Israel as well. They are being very open about it. They just don't call it in the Afrikaans word apartheid. They use the Hebrew word hafrada, but it amounts to the same thing. And this is actually a law that has been passed out of fear. It has been passed out of the fear that because of the Israeli propaganda aimed at the world to say such lies as Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. This is a kind of propaganda that makes Israelis worry, oh, maybe the non-Jewish citizens of Israel, the Palestinian citizens of Israel, will exploit this propaganda and say, oh, you're saying that you're a democracy, so we demand equal rights. So in order to respond to these accusations of apartheid, the answer of the Israeli Knesset and the answer of the Israeli government is, yes, we are apartheid. This is exactly what's going to happen. We want to make sure that the state of Israel doesn't belong to its citizens. It belongs to the Jewish people, wherever they may be. And the Jewish people are not necessarily citizens of Israel. About half of the world Jews don't live inside Israel.
Think about what's being said here. I mean, some of this is profound. And if you really think about what's being said, you can be born in bumfuck Louisiana, and if you are a Jew, you have more access to that territory than somebody that was born in the country itself, if that person was not a Jew. I find that to be utterly amazing, and yet they take that as making perfect sense. Let's let them keep going. Flip.
But now the state of Israel belongs to them, even more than it belongs to people who have lived in the land of Israel for many generations. But now their own country doesn't really belong to them. And that's really the very essence of apartheid.
And in terms of the actual implications of this law, how would it change the way that people live in Israel and exercise their democratic will?
Well, here I think it seems like the law is not going to change anything, because when they say, for example, Hebrew would be the only official language, in practice, Hebrew is the only official language. And Israeli institutions and public institutions refuse to use Arabic, which used to be an official language of Israel until today. And they insist on speaking Hebrew and publishing everything just in Hebrew. There's also a clause in this law that says that the government will promote Jewish communities or Jewish settlement, which is another form of apartheid, Jewish-only communities, Jewish-only settlements. And that's also something that has been done for decades. And it's nothing new. The fact that now it appears in the law is just a way of the government to say, this is our policy and we're going to continue it, and no longer try to pretend as if we are actually a democracy where Palestinians can also have their communities supported by the government. So in that sense, I don't think there's going to be a lot of change. But I do think that this kind of very aggressive discourse that the government is bringing, openly calling for Jewish supremacy and for racist legislation, is something that affects the whole political discourse in Israel and the whole atmosphere.
You know, it's funny. If someone said they just wanted a white state, this is a white state. We're starting a white state. We're moving into this particular place and we are going to have a white nation. Are there going to be other people living in that nation? Yeah. But it's a white nation. We need to make sure it's clear and very, very clear that it is a white nation. Everybody else can go fuck themselves. It is a white nation. People would have feelings about that. And yet they're doing this to say this is a Jewish state. This is a Jewish or Jewish nation, however you want to call it. Yeah, great breakdown for Real News. Great breakdown. All right, I'm not gonna dwell too much on this one because I know it's early in the morning. Jimmy covered it, but it's sparse. Let's see. What's sparse? Although the rise of austerity in the EU, far-right neo-Nazi style parties are on the rise in Europe. Yeah, they are. A lot of that has to do with the refugees coming into the country and people having a backlash to the refugees. The right is exploiting it, which is more than anything else. If people were coming into the communities like that and they weren't, the right wasn't exploiting it in the way that they were exploiting it, would that reaction have taken place? I don't know. You can make an argument that says they wouldn't be able to exploit it if people didn't have some feelings about it. But it's like an irritant. Tabitha Enrique, as I said, this was going to happen 6 months, a year, and here we are. Here we are, indeed. Civil disobedience. Israel has a white Jewish preference, by the way, civil disobedience. This is kind of the point that I'm trying to make. The moment that you say Judaism or being Jewish is a race, fair enough. And if you say this is now a Jewish state, what if somebody said this is a black state? This is a Jewish state. If this is a white state, that it's racist. I mean, it's on its face. Racist. There are other people living in that country, and you're calling it a Jewish state. I'm trying to make this point that if people are saying a white state, it would get across something that was sticking their craw. When people scream white power, people feel some kind of way about it. But you can have a Jewish state. It's amazing. So, Dominique Busimi, we're giving Israel $10 million a day to fund this apartheid and Zionist atrocity against Palestinians. Think about that. Your tax dollars are going to fund this racist state. And by the way, me calling it racist, don't take my word for it. They call themselves a Jewish state. By definition, it's racist. Ivory Oasis. You have to be a bit fair about it, though, and recognize a lot comes from the fear that was ingrained in Jews 90 years ago. They are trying to keep a state from deciding to burn them again. An atrocity against Israel does not justify them committing atrocities against others. Full stop. That's a fail. Look, being fearful is one thing, but being fearful and taking it out on somebody else, well, Are you saying that the people who atrocities are committed against are supposed to be forgiving of the people who are committing atrocities against them because something happened to them? Hey, if somebody is a pedophile, and it just so happened that somebody had sexually molested them, is it okay that the guy is now a pedophile in this kind of ingrained way that came from this kind of human experience of some atrocity happening to the kid, creating a psychological break in the way that they process the world? Are you telling me that's okay? This idea of being fair because something happened to them is, I can understand being fair, but yeah, an atrocity committed to you doesn't necessarily okay you committing atrocity to somebody else. If they would have turned that ire on the Germans, I could be less forgiving. They didn't do that. They turned it on the Palestinians. So, just saying. I'm gonna have yeah, Balthazar, I agree with you. I agree with you. The most anti-Semitic thing happening in Israel is violence towards Palestinians. It's showing the world the absolute worst possible image of Judaism and Jews. Preemptive actions are war crimes. I agree. I'm going to end this because I have one that I want to do with just the Jewish question in general. I'm calling it the Jewish question because they always say the black question or the Palestinian question or the whatever question. Jewish state. All idea of a democracy are gone. All idea of this kind of democratic nation gone. Jewish nation. We're here for Jews. I want to talk about that in the very next one. And yes, I will be profoundly fair. And I will be so fair that I think some people will completely disagree with my opinion, even though I am going to be absolutely and completely perfectly right. Let's end this one. All right, guys, if you enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon. I'll see you guys in like 3 minutes. Thanks, guys.